To the United States will talk about illegal immigration sanctuary cities and MS.
Go after the violent MS-13 gang during his remarks. Earlier today, White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley doubling down on the president's comments last week.
They've been caught cutting people's heads off, tearing people's actual hearts out of their own bodies. One of the most brutal and bloodthirsty gangs in history, rampaging this country. People need to know about it and understand that this president is demanding Congress close the loopholes in the immigration law so that we can get these people out of this country and protect the American citizens. And Democrats want no part of that.
We'll ask Karl Rove and South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy about the president's immigration policies in just a moment. But first, Colin McShane from the Fox Business Network is traveling with the president on Long Island, and he's there now with a report for us. Connell.
Hey there, Dana. The president has maintained all along that animals remark was taken out of context by some, that he was clearly referring to members of the MS-13 gang when he said it, not to all immigrants. Now, there was a group of protesters gathered out here outside of the president's event on Long Island a short time ago, some of whom took exception to the use of that term, no matter what the intent may have been. Take a listen.
We're here to defend, I think, everyone's humanity. We think that the language that this president and our Congress member here on Long Island, Peter King, is using is unacceptable. It doesn't lead to solutions, and it's actually causing more division in the community.
Now, as we wait for this roundtable to begin in just a few minutes, we are told by the White House that what they see as some loopholes in the current immigration law will be addressed and discussed. Among those on hand for the roundtable, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen. You also have the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, as well as a number of members of immigration agencies and what have you. And local members of the Congress, all Republicans, you'll see. Lee Zeldin, Peter King, Dan Donovan, who represents Staten Island, all here. This district where we are today, Beth Page, actually represented in the Congress by a Democrat in Tom Suozzi. I reached out to his office, and they say he was not invited. Had he been invited, they say he would have attended today. Now, all of that said, the bottom line, Dana, is this. MS-13 has been absolutely wreaking havoc here on Long Island the last few years. The White House putting out numbers about the gang saying that 40% of all the murders that were committed in Suffolk County, a little east of where we are today, from the beginning of 2016 to the middle of last year, were in one way, shape, or form tied to this violent gang, which you'll hear more about here in just a few minutes. Dana, back to you.
All right, Connell, thank you for that. And as we await President Trump's remarks, the White House is defending that controversial comment that he made about violent gang members. Take a listen.
We have people coming into the country, or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them. But we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals. And we're taking them out of the country at a level and at a rate that's never happened before. And because of the weak laws, they come in fast. We get them, we release them, we get them again, we bring them out. It's crazy.
Karl Rove is a former White House Deputy Chief of Staff for President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. Karl, before I ask you a question, I want you to listen to how the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, answered a question about the use of the word animals. Take a listen.
MS-13 has done heinous acts. It took an animal to stab a man 100 times and decapitate him and rip his heart out. It took an animal to beat a woman they were sex trafficking with a bat 28 times, indenting part of her body. And it took an animal to kidnap, drug, and rape a 14-year-old Houston girl. Frankly, I think that the term animal doesn't go far enough.
Karl, we're looking at this event here on Long Island, New York. The president is going to take a seat here in a moment. Let me just get your quick thoughts on this controversy. Is it much ado about nothing, or is it just actually helping and strengthening President Trump?
Well, it's probably helping him because, look, it would have been an easy thing if he had said in his original comment, these MS-13 gang members are animals. Then we would have had all this kerfluffle where people were trying to conflate his comment about the gang members with trying to make it sound like he was talking about all immigrants or all illegal aliens in that same vein. But look, this is a fight he welcomes, and it's one that, frankly, is sort of strange. When I listened to some of the comment from the fellow from Long Island saying that this isn't constructive, the president was right. These people are some of the most heinous crime creators in our country, and most Americans would welcome their departure from the scene.
Yeah, I wondered why the Democrats didn't try to get to his right on that, but he's going to start. Carl, if you'll stick with us, we'll come back to you. Everyone, let's listen to President Trump.
A lot of hours there. Great place. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. We're here today to discuss the menace of MS-13. It's a menace, a ruthless gang that has violated our borders and transformed once peaceful neighborhoods into blood-stained killing fields. The horrible people, by the way. Thank you very much to Secretary Nielsen, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Rod, thank you. Acting ICE Director Tom Homan, who is going to be, I hope you're going to be with us for a long time. I'm hearing he's going to go into a little bit of an easier job, but you won't be happy. You won't be happy. What a job you've done. Thank you very much, Tom. And Acting Assistant Attorney General John Cronin. Thank you very much. Thank you, John. And we also have a couple of folks with us today. Laura Curran, Nassau County Executive, wherever Laura may be. Hi, Laura. How are you, Laura? Thank you very much. I want to thank a very good friend of mine for a long time that this area does very well, the great Peter King. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Doing a good job. And he's fully got my endorsement, even though I assume he has no opponents. I don't know if he has any opponent. Nobody would be that crazy to run against Peter. Congressman Lee Zeldin. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. Great job you're doing. Thank you for all your help. And Congressman Daniel Donovan, really known as Dan, right? Dan Donovan, been a friend. For their great leadership in combating MS-13. Also, Erin King, you know who I'm talking about, Sweeney. Where's Erin? Where are you? Hello, Erin. How are you? A little bit of a relationship. Oh, Rosemary. Hi, Rosemary. So you say, that's my wife. I know that's your wife. Nice to see you. Thanks, Rosemary. Thanks for being here. Thank you very much, Erin. It's a great honor to have you. We're also grateful to be joined by Commissioner Jerry Hart of Suffolk County and Commissioner Patrick Ryder. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And they know this threat probably as well as anybody. We're especially moved today to be joined by families who have suffered unthinkable heartbreak at the hands of the MS-13 gangs. I'm truly honored to be joined again by the courageous families who were my guests at the State of the Union. That was a special evening. Elizabeth Alvarado, Robert Mickens, Evelyn Rodriguez, and Freddie Cuevas. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Their beautiful daughters, Kayla and Nisa, were murdered by MS-13 gang members, many of whom exploited glaring loopholes, and we have the biggest loopholes of any country anywhere in the world. We have the worst immigration laws of any country anywhere in the world. But they exploited the loopholes in our laws to enter the country as unaccompanied alien minors. They look so innocent. They're not innocent. We are praying for these families with us today, and we pledge to honor the memory of those you lost with action and resolve, and I'll just add another word, with great success. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And they will not have passed in vain, that I can tell you. MS-13 lives by the motto, kill, rape, and control. That's actually their motto. Kill, rape, and control. Last month, MS-13 reportedly called for its members here on Long Island, where I essentially grew up. You know Jamaica, right? I always said Long Island's very close. To call and to see what happened is just incredible. But they killed a cop for the sake of making a statement. They wanted to make a statement. So they killed a cop, a policeman. Here in Nassau County, MS-13 gang members were charged with killing and hacking up a teenager. And police officers just told me 4 other young men were brutally murdered recently by MS-13 in Suffolk County. In Maryland, MS-13 gang members are accused of stabbing a man 100 times, decapitating him, and ripping out his heart. Police officers also believe the MS-13 members beat a sex-trafficked 15-year-old girl with a bat 28 times, totally disfiguring a beautiful young woman. In Texas, 2 MS-13 gang members were charged after kidnapping, drugging, and raping a 14-year-old girl. They then murdered her and somebody else. Crippling loopholes in our laws have enabled MS-13 gang members and other criminals to infiltrate our communities, and Democrats in Congress refuse to close these loopholes, including the disgraceful practice known as catch and release. That's you catch them, you write up a little piece of paper that's meaningless, and then you release them. And they go all throughout the country, and they're supposed to come back for trials. They never come back, or very rarely. It's the rare person that comes back. Democrats have to abandon their resistance to border security so that we can support law enforcement and save innocent lives. And I noticed recently where Democrats, Nancy Pelosi as an example, are trying to defend MS-13 gang members. I called them animals the other day, and I was met with rebuke. They said, they're people. They're not people. These are animals. And we have to be very, very tough. So I'd now like to turn this over to a man, really, he has been a great friend of mine, a tremendous supporter, and I've always been a supporter of his, Peter King. He does an incredible job, and nobody knows this situation and this horror show and these laws, how bad they are. Worst in the world, better than Peter King. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. And let me say what.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President, so an honor is to have you back here on Long Island. As you say, you're a neighbor. You're in Suffolk County last year, Nassau County this year, and you, more than anyone in the country, is highlighting the evil of MS-13. I congratulate you. I thank you for leading this effort. They are horrible, vicious, rotten murderers, and you are really leading the charge, and thank you for doing this. Thank you for assembling all of us here today, and thank you for mobilizing all the efforts of the federal government behind this. So thank you very much. Also, on a somewhat jocular note, let me tell Laura Curran I want to thank her for giving visas to Donovan and Zeldin to let them into Nassau County. I promise you I'll get them out of here as soon as I can, okay? So, okay. Now, we're very sure this is a very serious issue to have these family members here. I've worked with them. I know what they've gone through. And for anyone who wants to minimize the danger of MS-13, just ask Commissioner Hart, Commissioner Ryder. They know firsthand exactly what this is all about. Let me also commend ICE for the great job that they do. Tom is here, and he's done excellent work in Suffolk County and in Nassau County, working with Nassau and Suffolk County Police. So, Mr. President, you have experts here that can talk. I just want to, again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I do want to say, and I have to pay great tribute to ICE, Border Patrol, but ICE came in and they are doing a job. We are taking them out by the thousands. Now, if we had laws that were proper, they wouldn't be coming back to the extent, but they've taken them out by the thousands, and it's way down, but it's still far too much, and it's unacceptable. So I thought maybe what we'll do is we'll go around the table, say a few words. If you might, we'll start right here. You have done a fantastic job, and we appreciate it. Let's go. Why don't we start? Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the very day that Attorney General Jeff Sessions was sworn in, you signed an executive order with a very clear directive: reduce crime in America. And it is my honor to support carrying out your mandate by helping to bring MS-13 to justice and by working to dismantle this gang that's terrorizing our communities. I know people in this room are very familiar with the horrifying stats, but MS-13 is one of the most violent and formidable threats that our country faces today. MS-13 leaders may operate out of prisons in El Salvador, but the gang is alive and well in our streets. It is estimated there are 10,000 MS-13 members in the United States. 2,000 are estimated to be right here in Long Island. And their ranks are continually being refilled with new emissaries from El Salvador. MS-13 is infiltrating our high schools, our middle schools, even our elementary schools. The gang's brutality, as you alluded to, Mr. President, just cannot be captured by words. You mentioned their motto, kill, rape, control. They live by that motto. They kill, murdering their victims, murdering them with machetes, chains, knives, bats, firearms. They rape, gang raping young girls, selling them for sex. They control, killing not just rival gang members, but also fellow MS-13 members who are suspected of being cooperators with law enforcement or violated gang rules. For example, in March, an MS-13 member named Elmer Lopez pled guilty to murdering a fellow gang member who is suspected of cooperating with law enforcement. Lopez and his cohorts brought their victim to a secluded, wooded area in Brentwood, maybe about 15 miles from here, where they took turns slashing and stabbing him to death. Mr. President, the victim's skeletal remains were discovered more than 4 months later. A few months ago, MS-13 member Raul Landaverde Herran, who also is facing federal charges for allegedly illegally re-entering the company after he was deported. Landaverde Herran was convicted of murdering someone who had fled El Salvador for Maryland to avoid a kill order from MS-13. Landaverde Herran and his fellow thugs lured that victim to the woods, shot him in the head, and stabbed him in the face and neck. For his role in the murder, Landaverde Herran received a promotion from MS-13. Well, Mr. President, thanks to our criminal justice system, he will also be receiving a mandatory life sentence.
Great.
And to give one other example, Mr. President, last November, Yerman Hernandez Ordonez, a Honduran national who was illegally in the United States, was sentenced for his role of an MS-13 murder in Virginia. Hernandez Ordonez.
All right, we've been watching President Trump at a roundtable in Long Island, New York. He's surrounded by officials from his administration and local officials and law enforcement as they talk about MS-13, the gang there. We are going to continue to monitor this event, but we want to bring back in Karl Rove. He's former Deputy Chief of Staff for President George W. Bush. Let me ask you something about this issue of MS-13. You know, I read in some places that there is criticism that the MS-13 threat is overblown. But if you live in one of these communities where the gruesome attacks, as the gentleman was just explaining to the president there, if you live in a community where that's happening, it's certainly not overblown. And has the president zeroed in on something that really needs to be taken care of?
Yeah, and look, it's not overblown if your community is suffering the kind of depredations that this gang can bring about. And look, even in those communities, a lot of what they do is behind the scenes. It's inside the immigrant community itself, and so it's largely invisible to the broader population. But this is a threat, and the MS-13 has been the focus of special efforts by the Justice Department and by counterterrorism groups, by fusion centers that involve various agencies of the federal government and the local government. And you go talk to local officials where the MS-13 pops up, and they're popping up in a lot of places across the country, not just the big cities, but across the middle part of our country. There's a great deal of concern about what damage they can do to a community.
Let me ask you about something that the president's just saying. He wants tougher laws. And there's a debate going on Capitol Hill right now with House Republicans and all the Democrats apparently going to sign onto this discharge petition to try to force a vote. Let me show you what happens. They circumvent House leadership. They would force this series of immigration votes. We have, as I said, about 21 Republicans have signed it. There's pressure for more. 14 more signatures are required to trigger this debate. In the minute we have left, Carl, what do you think about this?
Well, look, there are two ways to get a bill to the floor. There's one way where you pass something out of a subcommittee. It goes to the committee of jurisdiction. It's then approved. It then goes to the Rules Committee, which sets the guidelines on when it's going to be considered on the floor and what kind of amendments are going to be allowed. And then it goes to the floor of the House. And this is the way the rules allow. But the rules right since the beginning of Congress have allowed a discharge petition. That is to say, if a majority of the members of the House say, we want to vote on something, they write a petition explaining what they want to vote on. If they get 218 votes, then it's guaranteed that it comes to the floor. So there are two ways of getting to the floor. Both of them are regular order, but rarely has the discharge petition been used. This particular petition guarantees the vote on 4 different kinds of immigration bills, including the so-called leadership bill, the Goodlatte-McCall bill, named after the chairman of the Judiciary and the Homeland Security Committees. But there are 2 ways to go about doing this. This one's rarely used. This is the way virtually every piece of legislation comes to the floor, and it's going to be a real test for the House leadership because they're very close, as you say, they're very close to getting the 218. May not get there, could get there.
All right, Carl, thanks for being here with us as we watch that roundtable that the president is having on MS-13 in Long Island. We appreciate you being here, Carl. And we'll have more on the president's immigration policies with Congressman Trey Gowdy, who will also be part of tomorrow's classified briefing on the Mueller investigation.
Immigration, and particularly by the challenge of unaccompanied minor children. And there are several loopholes in federal law that facilitate this, that create a particular problem for Homeland Security and for us with regard to unaccompanied children who enter the United States illegally. The first is that they are not eligible for expedited removal, which means that most aliens who enter the United States, if they're caught within 14 days, within about 100 miles of the border, they can be removed on an expedited basis without needing to see an immigration judge. But under federal law, all unaccompanied alien children, regardless of nationality, they have to go before a judge. They cannot be subject to expedited removal proceedings. The second challenge is that almost all unaccompanied children are released from custody, even if they want to go home. And the reason for that is that there's an exception for aliens from Mexico and Canada. They're permitted to withdraw their applications and return home. But for other countries, even if those aliens request to go home, we're not allowed to do it. We're required to put them in immigration proceedings. And in addition to that, Homeland Security is required to turn them over to HHS within 72 hours as a result of federal law. It can take months and sometimes years to adjudicate those claims once they get into the federal immigration court system, and they often fail to appear for immigration proceedings. In fact, approximately 6,000 unaccompanied children each year fail to appear. When they've been summoned, they're released and they don't show up again. The third challenge is a consent decree entered by the government in 1997, which continues to burden our efforts to enforce immigration laws. Under that consent decree, INS at the time agreed that illegal alien children would be subject to special rules, special judicial supervision that handicaps DHS's ability to detain and promptly remove unaccompanied alien children. And the fourth challenge that we face is that once released, as you mentioned, many of them never come back again. With very few exceptions, once those unaccompanied alien children are released into the community, even if they're gang members, they will generally remain in the United States. They frequently abscond and fail to appear for the removal hearings. Approximately 90% of all removal orders each year result from a failure to appear at a hearing. And according to Homeland Security statistics, less than 4% of illegal alien children are ultimately removed from the United States. So most of them, once they're released, they're here to stay. The consequence of these loopholes, Mr. President, is that although we're doing everything we can to combat crime in the United States, we're letting people in who are creating problems. We're letting people in who are gang members. We're also letting people in who are vulnerable. Many of these alien children who have no parents, no family structure, we're releasing them into communities where they're vulnerable to recruitment by MS-13. And so some of these kids who come in without any gang ties develop gang ties as a result of the pressure that they face from people that they confront in the communities. So we're hopeful, Mr. President, that we can get some assistance from the Congress in closing some of these loopholes so that our law enforcement officers won't have to work so hard, and so we won't have more victims like Kayla and Lisa. Thank you.
And I think that's great, Rod, and I think it's happening. I mean, I'm seeing a willingness, even to a certain extent by the Democrats, is starting to come around, but it's brutal. It's brutal, as you know better than anybody. It's a tough situation. We need the laws enhanced very substantially and very quickly. Thank you, Rod, very much. Very nice.
All right, that was Rod Rosenstein addressing the president on MS-13 and the issues he thinks need to be addressed, especially these loopholes that the president wants to deal with on MS-13. I'm joined now by South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy. Thank you. I know you have to go at 2:30, and you stuck around for me, and I appreciate that because we could use your expertise on a couple of issues. On the first one, as a former prosecutor, what do you think is really needed that the Congress needs to pass in order to meet the standards of what Rod Rosenstein was just describing to the president from a law enforcement angle?
Well, you have to have two types of security. You have to have border security, and you have to have internal security, and you have to have a mechanism by which to remove people who are not law-abiding in an expeditious way. So I would point out to you this Supreme Court case, Zavadas, which is impossible for normal people to understand how if your home country won't take you back, we're going to release you back on the streets in the United States, no matter what underlying crime you committed. That is impossible for reasonable people, including someone like me who aren't that reasonable. It's impossible for us to understand how someone who just committed a heinous act, served their time, won't be sent back to their country of origin. So you have to have security. It's the preeminent function of government.
Tomorrow, I know that you're going to join Chairman Devin Nunes from the House Intel Committee for this briefing about the FBI informant issue. Take a listen to what President Trump had to say about that earlier today.
This supersedes Republicans and Democrats. So what I want from Rod, from the FBI, from everybody, we want transparency. And you know what? I think in their own way, they are obstructionists, but even the Democrats, I really believe, on this issue, it supersedes. I think they want transparency, too.
Congressman Trey Gowdy, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, the leading Democrats, they have sent out a letter to the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, who we just saw addressing the president on this MS-13 conference, and to the FBI director, saying that they believe that this briefing that's going to be held tomorrow should be done in a bipartisan fashion with the Gang of Eight. Would you have any objection to that?
I don't care who comes. I'm not in control of the invite list. The only thing I would ask, Dana, is if you're going to show up with an open mind and closed lips. In other words, don't leak like a sieve when we get through with the meeting. And the importance of an open mind, you got to keep in mind, Dana, 60 of my House colleagues have already voted to move forward with impeachment on President Trump before the very first finding by Bob Mueller. Brennan wants him in the dustbin of history. Comey says impeachment is too good of a remedy for him. Loretta Lynch wanted it called a matter and not an investigation. I mean, those are the folks that don't have an open mind. So if there's a Democrat who is serious about figuring out what our law enforcement agencies did in 2016, and importantly, the basis, the factual predicate that led to whatever investigatory decisions were made, I'm happy to have them in the room, but it's not my meeting, and I don't publish the invite list.
It's good sometimes not to be in charge of the invite list. Congressman Trey Gowdy.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we're still keeping our eyes on the president's immigration roundtable. We'll bring you back. Notable first and glaring voting trends in last night's primary elections. Here to break it down, Chris Stirewalt, Fox News politics editor and editor of Halftime Report. I'm glad that you're here with us today. I want to start with Georgia, if you don't mind. Georgia on my mind in particular. That's pretty good. I know. Last night, Stacey Abrams beat the Stacey Evans. It was called it was the Stacey's down there. She won by quite a large margin. That was the initial polling, 33-15. She ended up winning something like 73-24, something like that. And it was a very interesting race to watch, in my opinion, because it showed the Democrats there's two paths to take. Go right, try to get some middle of the line voters, or go really far left. Stacey Abrams went left and she won.
Well, for a long time in Georgia politics, moderate white suburbanites, people like Sam Nunn, Zell Miller, and others, not that Zell Miller is a suburbanite, but who represented those kind of voters, relied on the support of black voters in Democratic, not just Democratic primaries, but in more importantly in general elections, to get the job done. And that's how Georgia stayed Democratic for longer than the rest of the Deep South, was because they had this successful fusion between centrist, white, moderate Democrats and black supporters. Well, guess what? The base for Democrats in Georgia is African American. That's the truth. And these voters chose a liberal, self-identified progressive, self-identified member of the resistance, a hardcore liberal Democrat who matches their mood and sensibility of this time to be their nominee. And we're not interested in a Caucasian suburban woman who said, what we ought to do is pretend to be something we're not. They said, we're here and we want to be heard.
So then when it comes to the general election and that matchup, Georgia is a red state. Is that still correct?
Bigly. Okay. And maybe not. It was Trump's weakest showing in the Deep South. But that wasn't because the state is brimming with Democrats. We have been told this now for a decade, that at any moment Georgia is going to become the new purple state of the East Coast, and Democrats are never able, seemingly, to get the job done in the state. And you see it, no matter how terrible the heinous Republican primary, how foolish and how ridiculous the Republican primary got, it probably is not going to ever have gotten or get in this runoff bad enough to make it possible that a self-identified progressive member of the resistance is going to win in Georgia.
But it's certainly an experiment, and it's playing out across the board. And I think that maybe why you saw the Cook Political Report and probably your power rankings moving some of these races towards the Republican side of the ledger. Let me also ask you about Kentucky. What happened there last night? And there was, as I understand it, some of these states that have experienced these teacher walkouts got a lot of attention, and a teacher won last night.
Yeah, how about that? Didn't just win, but this is in a Republican primary, unseated the majority leader. And it was a close race. But here is a school teacher unseating the Republican majority leader in the state house, who, of course, was opposed to the demands of the teachers. So this guy took it to the ballot box and he won. So how about that, democracy?
And then tell me about Texas. What do you think is happening there?
Well, we have another breakthrough with I believe it's been a long time since we've had a person who's an enthusiastic eye patch wearer to make it into Congress, but I think that is going to happen with Dan Crenshaw. He's there, and he proved one very important thing, I think, which is he literally ran for office, ran across this district, was underfunded. People said, this guy, he's got a good story. He's a wounded veteran. He's all of those things, but he's not the chalk. He's not the establishment. He doesn't have the power. He did shoe leather work and won this race. And again, this is proof that the system can work, but you got to know how to work the system.
Yeah, so Dan Crenshaw, he was a feature of this show, because when he ran that 100 miles of his districts in order to shake people's hands, I thought, now there's somebody with a lot of commitment. All right, Chris Stirewalt, thank you for that.
You bet.
So we lost the primary, but may not be done just yet. How a troubled former coal executive is looking to shake up West Virginia's Senate race. And the NFL announcing a new policy on kneeling during the national anthem. We'll tell you what it is.
So your vote in 2018 is every bit as important as your vote in 2016. Although I'm not sure I really believe that, but I don't know who the hell wrote that line. I'm not sure. But it's still important, remember that.
He's got great timing. Josh Holmes is a former chief of staff to Mitch McConnell, and Chuck Rocha, Democratic strategist and former Bernie Sanders campaign advisor. I got a chuckle out of that last night, Josh. You always love it when the principal gets up to read the speech. He's like, wait, I would never have said it that way.
Yeah. No, I know, Dave. I mean, this is what President Trump's supporters like the most about him, right? He breaks that fourth wall of political theater, lets the audience in on the joke. I mean, I bet that line has been delivered by every president, Republican or Democrat, since the very first American midterm election. And nobody really believes that the president feels that way, but they feel obligated to say it. And there's no question that the president feels as if this midterm is absolutely essential for his agenda to get done. So, yeah, It's a great laugh.
And Chuck, though, from the Democrats' perspective, it absolutely is the most important election. And the 2016 election is behind us, kind of. I mean, we still have to relitigate it every day, but it is behind us on the calendar. And the next election is 2018. What are your thoughts on how important this vote is to the Democrats?
Well, it made me think about it. I've been doing campaigns, Dana, and you know this, for like 25 years. And every 2 years, I look at people all around the country and go, this is the most important election of our lifetime, right? Well, good for Trump, because he was like, look, my election was the most important. This just in. Donald Trump thinks he's the most important, and everything about his election is. And it's a good point. You know, people kind of like that. It's kind of cheeky. But for the Democrats, it is a wave election. There's things happening out there. Who knows what it'll be by November, but there's definitely something happening on the ground that I'm seeing all across the country.
Now, let me just ask you about that. We just had Steyerwalt on talking about last night's primary decisions, and you have now the general election matchups in a lot of these big contests. And Josh, are Republicans feeling like they are in a better position if the Democrats are going to put forward a candidate like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, who is a wonderful person, but very far left for a state that statewide, if you're running statewide, you almost have to run in the middle, but maybe I'm wrong.
You know, we've seen a lot of this, actually. It's been underplayed quite a bit in the media, but there's been a number of candidates on the Democratic side in primaries where they have elected the quote-unquote least electable option, the one that's sort of in the Bernie Sanders mold rather than a mainstream mold that can compete in the general election. We saw one in Kentucky last night. Amy McGrath beat Jim Gray, who was kind of the DCCC's #1 recruit to take on Andy Barr, a congressman in that district who's very formidable. And they elected somebody who's significantly to the left of where anybody thinks you can be to win that district. So they do have problems with that. It's something that we saw in the Republican Party in 2010 and 2012 that they largely corrected since then, but it continues to be a problem for both parties.
But Chuck, I wonder if you see it differently, especially because I just had Jeff Weaver on. He was the chairman of the manager of the Bernie Sanders campaign, and he says at the end of his book, had Bernie Sanders been the candidate in 2016 instead of Hillary Clinton, then that would have made the difference and the Democrats would have won in 2016. Do you think the similar type of energy on the far left is going to help Democrats actually win and reverse what conventional wisdom is that I and Josh Holmes just espoused?
You have to find a way to motivate the base, and you have to get a lot of people to come out and work. I worked for Jeff Weaver for 13 months. I was a senior advisor for Bernie, and what he says is exactly right. And Donald Trump has proven that point on the Republican side. He spent an entire presidential election motivating the base, giving them a reason for change, something that give them red meat. Let's see if this will work, and I'm willing to go down that path. And I think Stacey Abrams is exactly the kind of person who can win Georgia, and Amy McGrath in Kentucky is a veteran. She served in our armed forces. She may be a little left, but she's lived and bled for this country. That's the kind of people we need running.
That is true. I mean, if you look at their Red to Blue campaign, the DCCC's, Josh, they have tried to find candidates and recruit candidates that are either veterans that have some moderate views, I guess you could say, but also that they're getting out there, they're well-funded, and they're campaigning tough. I mean, is there a possibility that Republicans should not take a lot of comfort in these recent polls that show them doing a lot better?
Well, I don't think there's any comfort for Republicans, period, in an election like this. A midterm, the way that this is structured, you got to run hard all the way through to compete. But I think for what the DCCC has done and what you see with Democratic House candidates, they have two problems, basically. One is that they're electing more primary candidates that are unelectable in the general election. But two, I mean, look, a lot of these candidates are ultimately going to have to answer the question of how they're going to support Speaker Pelosi in the end. And we have a very well litigated question on this where we know where the American people stand, and it's not with Speaker Pelosi.
Chuck, what do you think about that, though? I mean, is she really the boogeyman that the Republicans think she is?
District by district. So I've been running in races all over the country, and there's places where she's highly unpopular, but there are places where they're highly popular. Take the Lamb race in Pennsylvania. People say he ran as a Republican light, and he ran against Nancy Pelosi. He ran for what that district reflects, blue-collar, white voters, and he won. I think you're going to have a lot of individual races that talk about the individual issues of those individual people in those races. And I'm telling all of my candidates nationwide, you have to run in your district on your values and talk to your voters if you want to get elected. And the district in New York ain't nothing like like the district in East Texas where I'm from.
Well, that is for sure. Of lava inches closer, sparking fears of a possible explosion or release of toxic steam. Crews have already removed 50,000 gallons of flammable liquid. Owners just hammered out a new policy to address the firestorm over national anthem protests, with the decision announced during the league's spring meeting. Dan Springer is live in Seattle to help us understand it. You know, I know a lot about sports, Dan. Not really. That's why you're here. Go ahead.
Well, Dana, as you know, it's taken a while to get here after 2 full NFL seasons of controversy over players protesting law enforcement by kneeling during the national anthem. The league has finally said no more. Players who don't want to stand during the playing of the national anthem before each game will now be allowed to stay in the locker room and then come out and play the game afterwards. The NFL owners approved the new policy today and will change the league's game operations manual to get rid of that old requirement that all players must be on the field for the playing of the national anthem. The league has been under intense pressure since San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick first took a knee as part of the Black Lives Matter protest in September of 2016. He was eventually joined by a lot of other players. President Trump got involved, calling the players unpatriotic and asking that his Twitter followers boycott the NFL. And ratings did in fact take a hit. According to Nielsen, ratings for NFL games were down over 9% last season. In a statement released by the league commissioner Roger Goodell today, he says this season all league and team personnel shall stand and show respect for the flag and the anthem. Personnel who choose not to stand for the anthem may stay in the locker room until after the anthem has been performed. Teams will be fined if a player continues to kneel. While many will applaud the new policy, there were some who came out in support of the players and their right to this form of political activism. Initially, Roger Goodell supported those First Amendment rights, and for that he took a lot of heat. But now he's being criticized by the NFL Players Association, which put out its own statement today saying the new policy was made without consulting the union. Quote, NFL players have shown their patriotism through their social activism, their community service, in support of our military and law enforcement, and yes, through their protest to raise awareness about issues they care about. The union says it will review the new policy and challenge any part of it that may violate the collective bargaining agreement. Important to point out here, though, Dana, the players will not be fined if they take a knee. The teams will.
The team, right.
Dana?
All right, Dan, thank you.
Sure.
So many U.S. households still struggling financially despite the unemployment rate falling to its lowest in years. A new Federal Reserve study finding while things have generally improved for American families, 2 in 5 people say they don't have enough savings to cover a $400 emergency expense, and that 1 in 4 do not feel they are at least doing okay financially. So it's not a typical award ceremony why these dogs were honored on Capitol Hill.